Alright, here is your first unit review guide video. We'll start with a couple of key terms here. Understanding the idea of a republic. We have a republic here in the United States because we have representatives that we elect. The government is then meant to mediate any popular views, so there's not any quick and drastic change. A couple of the principles of the Constitution: checks and balances, separation of powers. Checks and balances: every branch has the authority to look over the other branches so they don't become too powerful. Separation of powers is just that those different powers that the branches have. Limited government. Government is not all powerful, and it does only what the citizens want it to do. Again, they're scared of a tyrant, so it limits the power of the government. A couple key terms: categorical grants, specific purposes. I compared that to an Old Navy gift card. You have block grants, which I compared to the Visa gift card. Block grants are what the states like, because they have more discretion, where categorical grants usually have strings attached. You have to do this for this purpose or else. Another principle of the Constitution: federalism. Two or more governments exercise power and authority over the same people. Again, it promotes unity. Duties can be split up, become closer to the people. However, sometimes different states are unequal. There's different policies, and interest groups get involved and dominate some of the states. Your idea of dual federalism, your layer cake, separate spheres, the old type of federalism. Cooperative federalism now is your marble cake. Everyone's working together to accomplish different tasks. Fiscal federalism, most concepts deal with money. A mandate, something that the federal government is requiring a state to do. For example, ADA mandates, some of those are unfunded, making the states pay for those things. You must do this, but we're not going to provide money for it. A couple of the key clauses in your Constitution: necessary and proper clause, or your elastic clause. They use this clause to carry out any laws and make any laws based on some of the delegated powers, so creating implied powers, and that will strengthen the federal government. The supremacy clause: the supreme law of the land is your federal government, U.S. Constitution. The commerce clause is meant to regulate commerce with foreign nations, other states. They can basically regulate almost anything that deals with buying and selling of goods and services. This also strengthens the federal government. And then, again, your numerator: delegated powers given to the federal government strictly in the Constitution. A couple key amendments: your 10th Amendment, rights reserved to the states, gives more power to the states. And then the 14th Amendment, which has a couple clauses: the Due Process Clause and the Equal Protection Clause. Again, this Due Process Clause protects your rights, makes sure the Bill of Rights are followed by the states, gives you due process in any criminal or civil procedures, protects your life, liberty, and property, while the Equal Protection Clause provides that no state shall deny any person within its jurisdiction. And this also has to deal with race and things like that. Idea of devolution: putting more power back in the states, so giving more power to the states, allow them to run some programs. Again, that is happening throughout the states. When they want to institute a new program, maybe the federal government isn't doing their job, the states will step in. A couple key ideas: John Locke's social contract theory. The only valid government is one based on the consent of the governed. Rulers and citizens enter into an agreement or the social contract to be governed by the people. It's by the masses. If it does not protect those three things, life, liberty, property, then it should be abolished, and all people have natural rights. Yet your battle between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. You have the Federalists who wanted to approve the Constitution as it was. That's why they were writing to the people of New York. And then you had the Anti-Federalists disapproved the Constitution, feared national government would become too strong, didn't have any protection of liberties. So that's why then eventually they were able to get the Bill of Rights to be approved with the adoption of the Constitution. In order to ratify the Constitution, this is in Article 7, ratification of the conventions of 9 states shall be sufficient, so 9 of 13 states were needed. The most common way to amend the Constitution: 2/3 of both houses of Congress and then 3/4 of all state legislatures. Again, this reflects the idea of federalism because both levels of government are working together. This appeased both sides to have a say when amending the Constitution. Your Bill of Rights, your first 10 amendments to the Constitution, guaranteed freedoms and rights of the individual, limited some of the power of the national government, gave them a little bit more power to the states. When adopting the Constitution, you had your compromises. One of the first ones was the Great Compromise. You had the Virginia Plan coming in and the New Jersey Plan, one for large states, one for small states. Based off of these plans, they came up with the compromises. They have two houses, one based on population, the other equal, so 2 senators from each state. And they also created the executive and judicial branch, again, based off of those two plans. The Electoral College was also a compromise. The framers disagreed on how to actually elect the President of the United States. They wanted a congressional selection. They wanted direct popular selection. However, they combined these two in Article 2, Section 1, and electors would then choose. So they used the popular vote based on the congressional individuals, and then those would be your electors, and whoever won the most electors would win the presidency. And then to appease Southerners, the 3/5 Compromise agreed to allow the South to count 3/5 of their population in each state to balance the power. Again, their population affects how many individuals are in their House of Representatives. Now taking a look at some of the foundational documents. Declaration of Independence. Again, it warned and declared the separation of 13 colonies from the King of England. It wrote down all their grievances, what they intended to do if things didn't change. Again, a lot of their key concepts do come from John Locke. Federalist 10 really focuses on the idea of factions. So what is a faction? Small, organized, dissenting group within a larger one, especially in politics. Again, you looked at Federalists, Anti-Federalists. Today you look at different interest groups and political parties. Some of the principles that it talked about really talks about the republic and factions, but also does address a little bit of separation of powers and checks and balances. Federalist 51 then does really explain the structure of the new government and what it should look like and what it should be, and goes more in depth into the separation of powers and checks and balances, and to reassure that this government won't become too powerful. On the other side of the argument, with the Anti-Federalists, Brutus 1 was also printed. Talks about how U.S. is too large to be governed efficiently, allows government too much power, requires people to sacrifice all those civil liberties, and they preferred a confederation because Congress, it felt like, it had too much power. One of the first documents created for the United States was the Articles of Confederation, the first official government, more of a league of friendship. It had a weak central government. The states had all the power. Again, there's no judicial or executive branch, and it was very unstable. We saw that in Shays' Rebellion. And some of the reasons it failed, it was hard to amend, hard to pass a law, couldn't control taxes, and again, they only had Congress. The U.S. Constitution created after the Articles of Confederation, eventually added a Bill of Rights. There are 7 articles. Article 1 of the Constitution addresses which branch? It is the legislative branch, also known as Congress. You choose Supreme Court cases that are required. McCall versus Maryland. This is when the Bank of the U.S. was being taxed by Maryland because they didn't like the competition. Supreme Court did declare that the government can create a national bank because it was necessary and proper for the bank to operate for things like borrowing money and coining money. And also, you can't tax a federal agency because it is the supreme law of the land. So using the supremacy clause there. In the United States of Lopez, there's a gun zone, and a student brought a gun onto campus. They were trying to charge this individual with a federal crime. However, they were trying to connect it to the Commerce Clause. There was no selling of weapons or transaction of any sort, so it did not have anything to do with the Commerce Clause. So this kind of weakens the national government, whereas in McCall, Maryland, that strengthened the national government. And then just kind of wrapping it up here, some of your essential questions. How did the founders of the United States Constitution attempt to protect individual liberty while also promoting public order and safety? They added a Bill of Rights. They had checks and balances, separation of powers, limited government. These concepts made sure that the government didn't become all too powerful, but also it put into place a government that could operate and wasn't going to be overthrown. However, theory, debate, and compromise influenced the constitutional system. At the convention, that led to many compromises between the states, whether it's big states, large states, slave states. They looked at different ways to vote people in. John Locke and social contract theory was also adopted in the Declaration of Independence and in the creation of the Constitution. And then you have these factions, Federalists and Anti-Federalists, who were debating over the strength of government, and those compromises between those two groups had to be achieved before the creation of the Constitution. The last question here, how does the development and interpretation of the Constitution influence policies that impact U.S. citizens? All these clauses within the Constitution, like the Elastic Supremacy and Commerce Clause, will impact how laws are created and how they are addressed by the Supreme Court when court cases are brought up. You also have the 10th Amendment, which gives power to the states. And you have your Bill of Rights, which protects your individual rights and liberties.